This is In Focus, the Hindu's current affairs podcast.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Hindu's In Focus podcast. I'm Sharmada Venkatasubramanian, your host for this episode. In a significant diplomatic development, a Taliban delegation led by Afghanistan's foreign minister recently visited New Delhi for official talks, the first such high-level engagement since the group took power in Kabul in 2021. Following the talks, India announced plans to reopen its full-fledged embassy in Kabul and expand cooperation in health, infrastructure, and education. But the visit also drew criticism after female journalists were reportedly barred from attending the Taliban minister's press briefing, a reminder of the regime's continuing restrictions on women and the media, and a point of discomfort for India's democratic image. This renewed engagement comes as Taliban-Pakistan relations deteriorate, creating new strategic openings that India appears ready to explore. Yet, New Delhi's outreach raises difficult questions. What has prompted this shift now? Can India balance pragmatic diplomacy with the values it has historically stood for? And can it deepen ties with the Taliban without extending formal recognition? To answer all these questions and more, we are joined by Kallol Bhattacharjee, Foreign Affairs reporter at The Hindu. Welcome to the podcast, sir.
Thank you so much.
So to start with, what prompted India to re-engage with the Taliban now, after 4 years of limited contact and a cautious wait-and-watch policy since 2021? And how is this different from the earlier limited humanitarian engagement and political distance?
Taliban has been a player in Afghanistan for almost quarter of a century at least, from 2001 to 2025. And prior to that, of course, we had the Taliban 1, that is from 1996 to 2001. And, of course, before that, we had the Mujahideen movement from which the Taliban ultimately emerged. So, you see, though Taliban as a kind of a legitimate political actor or even a de facto ruler of Afghanistan is a new concept for Indian establishment, so to say. But Taliban as a regional player and its activities are not unfamiliar to India, obviously, just as much as they are not unfamiliar to other stakeholders in and also outside the region. So since 2021 August, when Taliban Part 2 actually came into existence, when they overthrew the then government of Islamic Republic of Afghanistan, till now, there has been, of course, as you said, cautious exchanges between India and Afghanistan. This is also a period of familiarization. Let us also remember that this is a period in which Indian officials, Indian joint secretaries, and also the Indian foreign secretary himself, that is Mr. Vikram Misri, who reached out to the Taliban, and they actually interacted with the Taliban on multiple occasions. Now, this bilateral engagement, of course, was unfolding within an overall context, which, as we saw over the last few years, has undergone tremendous change. For example, to begin with, there has been a lot of internal problems inside the Afpak region, so to say, the Durand line and the nearby areas, which is essentially the Pashtun homeland, historically speaking. Now, when in 2021 the Taliban returned to Kabul as the de facto ruler of Afghanistan, and of course, despite all the challenges and their horrible human rights record, they are, after all, in control of the country. They have established full control over Afghanistan. There aren't any rival left as of now, unlike in, say, late 1990s when we had the Northern Alliance attacking the then Taliban government. Like that, Today, there are no such groups that are in a position to challenge Taliban on the ground. So what was happening in this particular tribal belt was that the Taliban or the Pashtun people who are inside of Pakistan were drawing a lot of hostility from the Pakistan military. Now, this is a region which is full of kinship, right? So the Taliban and also who are Pashtun actually, so they viewed this sort of attack on their kith and kin in the Afpak border areas in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and nearby areas as a sign of hostility from the Pakistani government, because it appeared to Taliban that the presence of Taliban in Kabul was a sort of a shield for Pakistan, that since Kabul is now under control of the Taliban, and therefore the Pakistani establishment could get rid of their internal security challenges that emanated from Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and those regions. So that created a lot of hostility actually from the Kabul side, from the Taliban rulers of Kabul, that they felt that if Pakistan takes us for granted, then there is really no prestige, or no in a sense there is no reason they thought for them to continue that sort of existence that they had earlier, in which they used to be neutral as far as Pakistan is concerned. But the Pakistani government's continued onslaught on the people who live in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa basically made Taliban rethink its policy towards Pakistan, which was actually their previous benefactor, because a lot of the Taliban leadership received a lot of support. They received, even their families were based out of Karachi and different Pakistani cities, that sort of support from the Pakistani establishment. So they felt that now was the time to really detach themselves from that sort of a close engagement that they had with the Pakistani establishment. That's, of course, number one. Outside the region, of course, the big change was when the US administration went out. That is, the Biden administration withdrew the American troops from Kandahar and the rest of Afghanistan. So that was a sign from the American side that they wanted to get rid of this extra baggage that the conflict in Afghanistan was putting on them. And therefore, the Pakistani government also felt that they were left alone, and therefore they had to handle the challenges coming from Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and from the Pashtun side themselves. So in a way, with the absence of the Americans at that time, with the increasing pressure from the Pakistani security establishment on the Pashtun population, the Taliban got into this autonomous mode where they had to decide what is good for them. And they felt that it was good for them to think anew about their political positioning in the region. And therefore, they started reaching out to other stakeholders. They reached out to the Russians, they reached out to the Chinese, they reached out to the Central Asian countries. They established supply chains with the Central Asian countries. The cross-border train links were activated with the Central Asian countries so that Taliban's dependence on the Karachi port could be reduced. So the resources of Central Asia could be accessed. So Taliban started moving away from its dependence on Pakistan, which was again supported by the superpower, that is the United States. And in that context, Taliban in a way became, more and more autonomous from Pakistan's, previous control. And therefore, now Taliban is in a position to extend its hand of friendship to its immediate neighbor and rival, because now there is absolutely hostile relationship between Pakistan and the Taliban. The calculations of 2021 that the Pakistani military establishment had in 2021 August has really fallen apart, because the challenges of the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa are such that they can't be handled without a military intervention, at least from the Pakistani side. And as it continues, naturally, your enemy's enemy is my best friend. That principle gets into action. And today what we have is that there is this organic understanding in the region that perhaps it is good for the Taliban to join hands, or at least if not join hands, then reach out to India, because India has, of course, a long-running feud with Pakistan. And this, two-front policy of, the former President Najibullah, as it used to exist in 1980s, is once again making a return to South Asia, because in that calculation, both the eastern border of Pakistan as well as the western border, that is the Durand line, are both active conflict zones, and therefore a Pakistani state is kept under pressure. So there are lots of these, internal changes in Pakistan. There are border area conflicts between Afghanistan and Pakistan, absence of the superpower in that interim period of the last 4 years, and then the Taliban's outreach to the other global stakeholders like Russia, China, Turkey, the Central Asian countries, that have really created a situation where Taliban has been accepted as a rational player by several countries and several stakeholders in the region. And therefore, it appears to the Indian policymakers also that perhaps Taliban can also be engaged, because Taliban, after all, also is behaving like a rational entity. It is not an irrational, as earlier the notion about Taliban was that it is one of those an absolutely violence-prone, tribalistic outfit. And what Taliban is increasingly telling us, as Mr. Muttaqi also told us yesterday, that they are introducing changes and they are hoping that conflict and war will never stage a return to Afghanistan. And they are moving in a direction of rationality and reasoning in some ways, which is accordingly being defined by them. Obviously, it's hugely problematic also from human rights point of view and those factors. But as of now, it appears to the Indian policymakers that Taliban, since it is behaving like a rational actor, it can be engaged with.
Right. So, how does it, first of all, change India's perspective, since what it has had since 2021? Because the reopening of Indian embassy in Kabul marks a major diplomatic shift, right? Should this move be seen as a form of, de facto recognition of the Taliban regime, even if New Delhi maintains that formal recognition is still not on the table?
There have been a lot of things, as we have been saying, that it is 4 years. The Indian side, of course, has engaged Taliban from the second year itself. That is from June 2022 itself, when the Indian side sent a technical team. And let us remember, the technical team was not sent to a new address. The technical team was sent to the Indian embassy. They took care of the Indian embassy. They took care, and it was named as a technical mission. It was named, as a kind of informal team that was taking care of humanitarian assistance projects of Afghanistan, and it was meant to help the people of Afghanistan. Now, it was not in that sense a political mission, but to open an embassy requires having political relationship. Now, that sort of a political relationship is possible only if the two sides are engaging in political dialogue. Now, obviously, this sort of dialogue has not been missing entirely. Obviously, there have been this sort of dialogue over the years. And today, what we have is a situation where, there is not full-fledged recognition, but there is a recognition of the fact that here is an entity that can be my partner. Here is an entity that can be linked to my aspirations and my plans in the region, and they will obviously, they are expected to sort of align themselves with us, because India is obviously the more powerful and more influential figure. Let us also remember that Taliban obviously is also from the global south, and India's behavior would also dictate in a way the behavior of the rest of the global south. What is going to be the policy of, say, African countries towards Taliban controlled Afghanistan? What's going to be the policy of the Southeast Asian countries, smaller countries of Southeast Asia towards Afghanistan, and whether ultimately a Taliban delegation can take the place of the previous Afghan government in the United Nations. So these are all interlinked issues that will come up for discussion. Of course, right now, as a first step, the government of India has gone ahead and said that it will upgrade the embassy, but it hasn't said whether an ambassador would be sent to lead that embassy. It could very well be that this current technical team would continue being in the Indian embassy in Kabul for some uncertain period of time. And that will also depend on the reciprocity factor, because the Taliban will also watch, what is the Indian policy, and then Taliban will decide how to engage the Indian side, because Taliban would also then would require to send its own diplomats, and Mr. Muttaqi has said himself that whether it is going to send its diplomats, low level or, so in the sense of junior level diplomats, or are they going to send a full-fledged Taliban ambassador, and would New Delhi accept a so-called Taliban ambassador, and under what conditions? So these are the things that will only become clear over time. As of now, it appears like a de facto recognition, because we're going to have a number of commercial links, right? So when you have commercial links, you are going to have banking links with the government of Taliban. And let us also remember that several people in Taliban are still sanctioned, including Mr. Muttaqi, who is currently having an exemption from the UN Security Council's counter-terror committee. But it is also very difficult to deal with entities who are facing international sanctions. So these factors will also have to be taken into account as India goes into this de facto and de jure mode of recognition, because this is not a one-step episode. There are multiple steps that will have to be initiated before India recognizes Taliban, or India uses its mission as a full-fledged embassy led by an ambassador, because there are commercial relations, there are banking issues, there are also aviation links that are opening up, there are air corridor that India and Afghanistan are going to deal with. So all these things will become operational only when you have these these various factors, as I said, those factors operating smoothly. And I think till the time we have put all those other factors in a seamless coordinated move, till that time I think India will still follow a little cautious policy in Afghanistan, though it has announced a full-fledged embassy for Kabul.
So now, to address the big elephant in the room, during the Taliban foreign minister's press briefing in New Delhi, female journalists were reportedly excluded, right? What message does this incident send about the challenges of engaging with a regime that systematically restricts women's rights and press freedom?
Well, I mean, this is a really big issue of Taliban, because, this is one area that, we have to first of all see the kind of people we're engaging with, right? Taliban, from the Indian point of view, India has never really, in a way, let me also remind our listeners that India has engaged with all sorts of radical factors, radical factions and groups historically, going back to the Algerian war in the 1950s, including the groups that were fighting the French occupation, to PLO, including nearer home with, say, even LTTE at certain period in the 1980s. And of course, we mentioned Najibullah's government in the 1980s, PDPA, which was the communist government of Afghanistan, that government, and which was known for its very brutal human rights record. Even that government was engaged by India. But then none of those governments, none of those factions were, in a way, if I can say very, very clearly, Islamist. This is the first time that the government of India is going ahead and looking at an out-and-out Islamist outfit as its potential partner. So this particular person, the way he presented his opinion about the women's rights and everything yesterday, Mutaki, he said that, they live in an Islamic regime, and in an Islamic regime, everybody's rights are protected, be it, men or women. So the point of view that he represents is absolutely contrarian to the liberal, democratic and progressive gender perspective that we in India and other democracies in the world today hold very dear to themselves. So, when we engage with this sort of people, we are also sort of venturing into unknown terrain. This person, who is here, obviously was trying to get a zone of comfort for himself in which probably he could feel happy or free to interact. But then, what we saw yesterday was also very, very instructive, that he did answer all questions from women journalists. I mean, he did not, avoid, or he was not rude or discourteous to anybody. So in that way, I mean, I think an attempt was made by, I would say, there was also other stakeholders involved in the first press conference that was organized, and the Afghan embassy was one part of the organizers. There were other stakeholders who are not, coming on record, and they're also not coming on and acknowledging their role. But it is understood that the Afghan embassy, which did not have a press wing, obviously was drawing guidance or sort of seeking support from certain other outfits, and maybe some of the in the host side, the Indian hosts also probably extended some support to them, and probably it was their sentiment or whatever they might have had on the table that might have led them to sort of build this exclusive men-only press conference that did not really quite go well, because it shows us that Taliban really doesn't have a plan as far as their gender rights, their human rights issues are concerned. And that is really a big challenge for the Taliban government's legitimacy, because as long as they don't rectify these problematic areas of their governing, they aren't really going to be fully acknowledged. And therefore, it will also come into play, because if the issue of full recognition has to be on the table, then how the Taliban treats its own citizens, especially women and girl child, how it treats this particular segment of the Afghan population will obviously be a big factor if India has to normalize relation with Taliban, and also ultimately if the Taliban so-called in administration, I still call it an administration, I'm not referring to it as a government so far, if that particular administration has to take the chair of the Afghanistan government in the United Nations, even the global community has to, in a way, certify that Taliban treats all its citizens fairly, irrespective of all the differences.
On this subject, the incident has also raised questions about whether diplomatic protocol was prioritized over our democratic principles. So, in your opinion, what balance do you think India should strike between courtesy to a visiting minister and upholding its own values?
Well, I think, in diplomacy, India is quite clear that it often prefers a value-based partnership, whether it is with the United States or with, say, Japan or Australia or other Western countries, or even with the global South communities like, say, Indonesia. We always talk about values and common history of struggle, etc. But with the Taliban, it is such a creature that it is really it is familiar to India because we know what Taliban represents. But at the same time, it's got this whole attitude which is steeped in very strong orthodoxy. So when we talk about doing diplomacy with such an outfit, it is an outfit which is not rooted in our moral universe. So how do we deal with such an outfit which is demanding diplomatic protocol and at the same time does not have full diplomatic partnerships, in that sense, full diplomatic recognition from the Indian side? So I think one probably had to strike a balance somehow, and I think the planning was quite short in that direction, and I don't think many of those factors really worked well as far as the optics are concerned, because if it appears that the host is facilitating this sort of a behavior in which the orthodoxy and the bad practices of the other side is actually accommodated on the Indian soil, then probably it does not really do justice also to the Indian aspirations, that in the sense that whatever India wants to achieve with Taliban, because the idea is actually to advance the Indian project and not really to advance the Taliban's project here. So I think that really was not really balanced well. But I would say that there are moments of diplomatic, realpolitik issues where Taliban can be a rational actor as far as advancing India's interest in the region is concerned. But in this particular area of gender and women's rights and rights for the girl child, that area is a very strong domain of disagreement between India and Taliban, and I don't think it's really going to go away anytime soon, because Taliban is making it very clear that they are willing to be flexible on many issues, but on this particular issue, which is very sensitive to their tribal communities, especially in the border areas of Afghanistan, they are not yet willing to negotiate on the women's rights and women's education and the education of the girl child. So I think this is an area of great and also very serious disagreement, which is not going to go away. But then that doesn't mean that India will not go on a stronger partnership with Taliban, as we are seeing increasingly that India is quite determined to go in a stronger partnership with Taliban. Today we are seeing there are these commercial talks happening with Mr. Mutaki, and yesterday he declared these air routes will be operational. People from Amritsar would be flying to Kandahar as well as to Kabul, and from Kabul people will be coming to Bombay, and from Delhi people will be flying to Kabul. So this interconnection will intensify, and naturally these commercial and diplomatic ties will also intensify. But whether Taliban will be reformed in the way that, say, those 1980s LTTE boys were reformed and who were asked to go easy on violence, I think that is something that only time can say. But right now, this particular episode of insensitive handling of women reporters and others, that has really sent a bad message. But I think it is a new outfit that India is engaging. It's a very hardcore orthodox Islamist outfit, which is not willing to accommodate the sensitivities of a liberal order, and we have to really wait and watch how this this new partnership evolves and if it can really survive its contradictions.
So, like you mentioned earlier in our conversation, Pakistan Afghanistan relations are on a growing decline right now. So, how do you think this deteriorating Taliban Pakistan relations alter the regional equation? And to what extent is India seeking to fill the strategic space left by Pakistan's fraying ties with Kabul?
Taliban emerged from the frontiers of Pakistan. So the links that Taliban has with Pakistan are very strong. It is a relationship which is going bad, right? So we have to remember that many Taliban leaders, for example, the Haqqanis, continue to have their business interests, their educational institutions, etc., in Pakistani territory. But in comparison to several people like like Maulana Akhundzadeh, Mr. Muttaqi himself, and several others who come from the Kandahar school, so to say, they are in a way far more they're far more free, and they are autonomous of the control from Islamabad and Rawalpindi. So there are these groups that are in a way less free and more free inside inside Taliban's power structure. Now, this particular power structure, obviously, it engages Pakistan, and it also it negotiates with Pakistan, unlike, say, India. Now, India is an option. India is a regional power, and Taliban is reaching out to India. And it is not that India is reaching out to Taliban. It is the Taliban which is reaching out to India and saying that we want to be your partner as well. So we have to really see whether Taliban can deliver. I mean, of course, Pakistan is creating a vacuum which can be filled in by other players. But is India also willing to do the kind of work that Taliban expects Pakistan to do? That is something that I would be very cautious before venturing in, because Pakistan has been a partner of Taliban for almost 35 years, going back to the days of the Mujahideen. So they have very strong connection as far as the Taliban's founders like Mr. Muttaqi and others are concerned. There are all these talks about how deep the relation of Taliban is to Pakistan. Today they are in a bad relationship, but will this relationship heal tomorrow? And if it really heals 6 months down the line, would India remain a sought after partner even then by the Taliban? That is something that we have to really see, whether the situation evolves quickly in 6 months down the line. Today, there is an active conflict happening in the Durand line, along the Durand line. Yesterday, we saw that 58 Pakistani soldiers were killed. The Pakistani forces have captured a number of Afghan border posts. And last Friday evening, Pakistan carried out airstrikes in Kabul, which they claim that they killed the TTP leader in that airstrike, though the Taliban side is saying that the TTP leader is still healthy and is alive. But thereafter, they have carried out further airstrikes even in Kandahar. Now, that is something very new and very rare, that Pakistan has not attacked Kabul using aircraft in the last 25 years. But it is attacking Kabul for the first time in 25 years. We all remember the war on terror by the US forces and the NATO forces in 2001, October onwards, when these big aircraft were used against Taliban targets. But that sort of attack was never carried out by the Pakistani Air Force on Kabul or other Afghan targets in the Afghan heartland. So this sort of hostility that Pakistan is opening up is obviously a new sort of episode also for Pakistan. So can Pakistan recover its friendship with Taliban? And can Taliban then again come together with Pakistan and build some sort of a working relationship? Because they have an old partnership going on here. So I think, India would be very, very cautious before, submitting to all the demands that comes from Taliban. What I sense is that Taliban wants to have an option, be it commercial, be it political, be it diplomatic in the region, because just being focused on Islamabad and Rawalpindi really does not help Taliban in the long run. And we see that from 2021 to 2025, the entire ballpark in Afghanistan has changed. Today, their partners of August 2021 is actually attacking them. So Taliban also is, it's a kind of, very fluid, dynamic, and fast changing region where these actors are making these real time calculations about how fast we can gain advantage from the situation that is quickly getting out of hand. So I think, India will step in some ways to convey a message to Pakistan that Pakistan should control its actors in our region, that is in Kashmir. And on the other hand, India is also sending a message that if necessary, India also has that punitive option through Taliban and other such actors that can deliver a punitive lesson or a punitive strike to Pakistan if it carries out further misadventures in our region, that is Kashmir. And therefore, I think India's immediate demands would be limited to these factors: that can Taliban serve India's requirement as far as acting as a strategic backyard, and deny Pakistan that depth, that strategic depth that famously General Zia used to talk about in the 1980s. So whether Taliban can deny that strategic depth to Pakistan, and whether Taliban can ensure a punitive strike capability for India in case Pakistan carries out misadventures like it did in Pahalgam. These are the areas that India would seek deliveries. And India would obviously hold on to its deliveries, its substantial deliveries, because Taliban obviously, unless and until it changes its human rights position, unless and until it changes its position on women's rights and women's education, India would hesitate, getting fully comfortable with Taliban. So I think, to answer your question in brief, that yes, the vacuum is very attractive from the Indian point of view, but then India's gains, rather the India's aspirations, or the India's strategic aspirations are quite clear. As I said, it is the punitive issues. Can the Taliban deliver it for the time being, for in the nearest future? That is what perhaps India would look at first.
Right. So, how do you think projects like the Chabahar port and India's significant investment in Afghanistan, facilitated through Iran, obviously, factor into India's broader regional strategy, especially amid its renewed engagement with the Taliban?
Well, in the last 4 years, India was not sure about the political will from Kabul as far as nurturing a project like Chabahar was concerned. But today, with the visit of Mutaki in Delhi and also in other parts of the country, it is quite clear that now there will be political will in Kabul. Because for a project like Chabahar, which is obviously quite complicated because it is not just the port that is important to us, it is also the connecting roadways. The Laram and Zaranj, those roadways that runs through Iran, and then it requires Iran's agreements and Iran's support. All those things benefit enormously if we have political will in Kabul. And I think that political will becomes available to India now. So having said that, everybody knows there are these, hurdles from the American side because the carve out on Chabahar has gone because of the sanctions that Iran is facing. So within this particular limited space that we get because of political agreements, like, if there is political will in Kabul, if there is political will in Tehran, there is political will in Delhi to ensure some sort of an access to the sea for the Taliban, the government in Kabul. A way around can be worked out. I mean, whether it is through the port of Chabahar or through some other port or through with assistance from some Gulf countries and Gulf entities, a way out can be configured, and it is not really necessary that it has to be focused only on Chabahar, which is again facing the sanctions from the American side. There could be other options as well that may open up because there is some air connectivity. Intense air connectivity can also deliver a great deal of items that are necessary for the Afghan people, like medicines and all sorts of business items that can be delivered to Kabul and Kandahar. So I would say that this availability of political will in Kabul is a new factor. And that will help not just the project in Chabahar, but also in other areas. And I'm saying this despite the hurdle, the American sanctions and etc. in place against Iran, having a direct line with Kabul will help. Not just, there are many other corridors that will open up. So I'm kind of hopeful that this can be managed despite the American hurdles.
So now, finally, before I let you go, what would you say are the diplomatic, moral, and maybe even security risks for India in engaging a regime like the Taliban, one that still remains internationally isolated, faces sanctions, and is criticized for, human rights violations as well?
Well, India has abandoned its cautious policy on Afghanistan, that is on Taliban. That's number one. And once we venture down that path, there is not really any option of going back. So it's a very risky option that India has really chosen now. And obviously, as we discussed earlier in this conversation, there are both internal issues that are unfolding in Pakistan. There are internal issues that are unfolding in Afghanistan. There is this awareness within the Taliban that they can be a rational partner to the international stakeholders in the region. And then, of course, there is this realization in India that Taliban can deliver certain punitive lessons for Pakistan, and therefore Taliban India friendship or whatever cooperation on this particular segment needs to be activated. Now, having said that, the moral issue, since you raised the ethical aspect of engaging with Taliban, I would say that it is not just ethical. I mean, we have live issues for which Taliban has not yet given us an explanation. Those issues will also have to be addressed by the Taliban at some point. For example, the attack on our embassy in 2008 that took place when Ambassador Jayant Prasad was India's envoy to Kabul. And the attack, even most recently, the murder of the photojournalist Danish Siddiqui in July 2021, just a month, rather weeks before Taliban took power. These brutal killings and these brutal attacks. Of course, Mr. Mutaki yesterday said that he regrets these deaths that took place in Afghanistan during the 40 years of war. But then there has to be some sort of a closure also for India as far as these tragic and violent incidents are concerned. So I'm saying that, the moral of the story is that India is engaging with a partner or an actor, rather not yet a partner, which has a very dubious reputation. And it is also not known to be fully trustworthy because it is having a difficult relation with its immediate partner, which has been its partner for almost 3 decades and more, that is Pakistan. And today it is, of course, trying to be close to India. So we have to really watch. There is absolutely no need for India to quickly go down the path and fully embrace Taliban. It is one of those moments where we have probably opened up and check them out. But this is, as I'm saying, there is no going back even on this limited venture that we have gone ahead with. And therefore, one has to really see, if India can, the Indian policymakers can balance it out by also highlighting their concerns on human rights and women's rights and education for everybody with the Taliban, and then balance it with India's hard-nosed strategic gains that India wants Taliban to deliver, as far as being this counterbalance to Pakistan on the Durand line. So I think overall, it's a very risky project. It is not easy to conduct, but it has been initiated. And therefore we have to really see how in the coming period. Now we are seeing in across the world there are many new things that are being tried. Now we have also seen that in the last 1 month, Taliban has hosted this delegation from Bangladesh. The delegation of clerics from Bangladesh came to Kabul and was hosted by Taliban. Therefore, the question that you are raising is something that even I would like to broaden it a little bit and say, is Taliban now trying to export its variety of Islam to other South Asian countries? Because there is Jamaat-e-Islami in Bangladesh, which is an orthodox, and there is also Islami movement, a United Islamic Movement in Bangladesh, which is also an extremely orthodox movement that believes in policing women's bodies. And recently, even the interim government of Bangladesh came out with a diktat that women should come dressed, quote unquote, in polite, fabric. Now that was immediately withdrawn because there was such a hue and cry in Bangladesh. So therefore, the issue is that with this sort sort of outfits, there is always a possibility that they would also like to gain some sort of a long-term strategic issue in the vicinity of India or nearby India or even inside India. So the Western criticism of the Iranian government often is that Iran wants to export its revolution, Islamic revolution, to different countries. Of course, Iran doesn't target India with that sort of an agenda, and India-Iran relation has therefore been rather smooth. But then if Taliban is conducting this sort of discussion with counterparts or clerics from Bangladesh, then the idea naturally becomes relevant here that is Taliban trying to teach others about how to be Islamist? So therefore, these the factors that you are raising, the ethical and the moral and diplomatic issues that we are to watch, we are to gain here. I would say that we have to really be careful about how we handle Taliban. Handling Taliban, reaching out to Taliban for a limited outreach is one thing, but to build a partnership with Taliban, which is, as we are discussing, is a highly problematic outfit with its own agenda, with its own priorities and own idea of human rights, is a completely different matter. So overall, it is a project which needs very careful handling, and therefore, it requires a complete overhauling of our ability of handling Afghanistan desk in the Ministry of External Affairs. It is not possible to handle Taliban in the way that it has been, in the way that Afghanistan been handled in the last 20 years anymore. Because this particular project is acquiring very serious and very large scale dimension, and we need to have required manpower, we need to have required experts and required, also, as you are saying, also people who can observe and track, the gender record of, or the human rights record of Taliban. So there are many of these factors that we have to take into account while engaging Taliban, even in a limited scope. So as I'm saying repeatedly, this is a highly risky proposition that India has opened up to. And we really have to see, if it can go ahead without causing some major embarrassment. I mean, this time, of course, the gender issue came up and it almost overtook the main agenda of the visit, that is the outreach to the Taliban. It is happening for the first time in 25 years. And yet it almost got overshadowed with Taliban's insistence on, exclusive men-only universe, which actually doesn't exist anywhere. So we really have to see, how India can conduct it without any major embarrassment or any major accident, because this relationship, even if it is a highly limited and highly restricted relationship, can easily go out of control. So one has to be, the policymakers have to be very, very careful on this relation.
Right. I think that brings us to the end of this episode. Like you mentioned, we just have to wait and watch where this new resumption in this relationship goes. So Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. It's a wonderful pleasure. Thank you.
Edited and produced by Sharmada Venkata Subramanian. If you liked it, do subscribe to In Focus by The Hindu on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts from. Thank you for listening.